welcome to another Sparkenation conversation. For those of you that don't know, Sparkenation is a spark that ignites passion, that leads to action, that changes what's normal. I'm thrilled today that I'm joined by three of the wise women in my life. Sue, Joanna, and Caroline. How wonderful to have you in the room. We're in for a great conversation, and I look forward to that as we go. It was back in 1977 when I first came across this idea that we are unique, one-of-a-kind human beings. I had a life-threatening illness, and Dr. Neri, my wonderful doctor, who, as it turns out, saved my life. He taught me many things, but there were two things. One was you're a one-of-a-kind human being, and therefore the treatment that we give you will have to be tailor-made for you. And the second thing he taught me after I recovered from the operation, he taught me about what he called music. And his expression was, don't die with your music locked in you. And as Sue and Caroline know, because we contributed to this wonderful little book called Enough, I tell the story of don't die with your music locked in you in this book. Caroline tells a wonderful story about the red nose story, isn't it, in the book, Caroline?
Yeah, that's right, yes.
And Sue has some wonderful wisdom throughout the book. But back then, Wayne Dyer wrote a book, somebody else wrote a book, there was a rugby coach here wrote a book, don't die with your music locked in you. It's sort of a reasonable term. We didn't really know what it meant my wife and I, back in those days. We were in our early 20s, and we didn't really know a lot about what was going on, but it really began a quest. I was lucky at the time that I was working in the corporate world, and what I was learning from some very good mentors was that personal development preceded business development. It wasn't the norm teaching in those days. I was fortunate it was the teaching that I received as a young manager and then as an executive. And those two things kind of went together. You've got this music, you've got this talent, you've got this special, I've gone on to call it unique wisdom inside of you, and your job is to bring it out of yourself and to help other people to do that. I knew that back then, and it was reinforced with the teaching I was receiving. Over time, I worked out that people weren't comfortable being one-of-a-kind human beings. And so I started to work with this idea, magnificence, which included the word essence. And so music got replaced with the word essence.
Yeah.
Because what I discovered, and when I left the corporate world in 1990, I left with the mission to become a mentor to help people to be happy being magnificent.
Yeah.
And I recognized this was my own struggle. It was everyone I knew's struggle. And everyone I met had an unconscious kind of disposition about being either miserable or mediocre and not magnificent. And I've come to realize this is the great quest of our lives. And so in the 32 years kind of since then, there's been a number of words that have come up: nature, element, vitality, gift, song, which is a favorite too, voice, of course. And in 89, which was the year before I left the corporate world, I read The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which really influenced me. But it wasn't Covey's best book in my view. This one was his best one. This is The 8th Habit. And it's about gratitude. And it's about finding your voice and helping other people find theirs. And I think I've read it 20 times since it came out in 2004. It's a much loved book. And then he wrote another book a few years later in 2011, which lives very close by. It's called The Third Alternative. Another wonderful book, because there's always a third alternative. We're living in a binary world. It's this or that. Some writers have called it the tyranny of either or, but really there's always a third alternative. And I think not misery, not happy being miserable, not happy being mediocre. The third alternative is actually to be happy being magnificent. Yeah. And this means to find your essence, to find this unique personal wisdom. Covey called it personal significance. To find out what it is and then dedicate your life to living whatever that is. And that's my work now for 32 years, and I've lost none of my passion to keep at it. And tonight I'm looking forward to a wonderful conversation with you guys about how we can help each other to see, unearth, magnify and enhance our essence.
Yeah.
Joanna, your path is a little different to mine, I think, but what's your story around this?
Yeah, well, that was a beautiful intro, Ian. And I'm just sitting here kind of basking in it, actually. I don't think I've heard you tell those stories before. So I'm Joanna Maberly. I'm a coach and facilitator. I've recently moved from London to Melbourne, so I'm sort of a neighbour of Ian's. And my work is around,
literally.
Yeah, my work is around rehumanizing work through play, and also helping people live and work in more meaningful ways. And I think this question of the meaningful bit is really relevant in what you're describing in this conversation. And I'd been thinking, we'd been talking about this this session, a month or so ago, about this idea of voice and essence. And in my mind, I was kind of going a different direction. But actually, with your intro, I really wanted to talk about sort of where I discovered my significance and how that came. And I think, the sort of the cliff notes on it was it came through quite significant hardships that disrupted my comfortable, normal ways. And I think that's probably something that most of us can relate to. And that when those disruptions came, there was that sort of, this kind of deep disruption. I needed to rethink who I was and what my life was about. And for me, that disruption came through becoming a parent. And that is something that not a lot of people talk about, I think, but there's a beautiful term called, let me just get it right, matriessence, which is about the birth of a mother. And I think, it could apply to men as well, but this birth of a new self within us, this new identity that we take, having shed lots of other aspects of ourselves in that process. The story I was going to tell about finding my voice was actually later down that track, but it was this integration of kind of finding myself as a person after motherhood, the experiences of mental ill health and health, and grappling with key kind of questions in terms of spirituality and meaning and purpose. And I think it's really important for me to say there that it's the integration of all of those threads together that has led me to a place where I feel like I have a deep understanding of my significance, the word you used. And now I have the joy of being able to put different lenses on it and understand it in different ways, and map it out on a floor with people or with myself or my husband, and use things like play and metaphor in my work to explore it. But there's two key things there that I think there's something about our integrity with self. So sort of the inner landscape of ourselves and how deeply we can come to understand it. And then also when that inner landscape comes out of us in a sort of creative expression, creative potential. And that some people describe that as making it's your unique sound or your unique note. And I love these sort of voice and music metaphors that we have already moving around the space, because I think that they have a lot of richness for us to explore.
Yes,
so,
indeed. And of course, they're very old wisdom, of course, as well. One of the books I've been reading, maybe I don't have it here, it's called Songlines, which is about how the Australian Aborigines have told stories for 60,000 years. It's been an absolutely wonderful book. But they talk about, like, the Native American Indians, as within, so without, the inner story, the outer story. It's a wonderful path that humanity's been on for a very long time. but I think it has a newness and a sense of urgency today, which I'm really excited about. Oh, we swapped screens there. That was a little. I've never seen that happen before.
Sorry, I'm back.
You went on the other side. There you go.
But yes, no, I'm done. That happened at a good time. So will you like to pass to the next person, or will I?
Yeah, no, I'm sensing Caroline has got the vibe there at the moment.
He certainly has. Oh my goodness. Thank you, Joanna, because you said some words which have completely resonated. One of them I'd never heard before, matrescence, like the birth of a mother, which actually figures, I think, much more highly in my story than I have realized. My story begins in Wales, which is, as Sue knows in particular, is otherwise known as the land of song. So I grew up in a little village just outside Cardiff, and song for me was a very important part of my life. And I think that has prompted my love for language and voice, which has always been there on my journey, but a lot of the time, especially in adulthood, was lost. I'd lost that love of words and voice along the way. But, I mean, today I'm a public speaking coach. The story as to how I got there is quite an ironic one, I think is a good word, because growing up in that village in Wales, I was incredibly shy. I was really wouldn't say boo to a goose, the kind of little girl, but I discovered through school that I really loved language and languages. And I made that my thing. I studied languages at university, and I realized that they were a portal to a wider and more exotic world. So my horizons broadened considerably because I was learning other languages. I learned German and French, and then later on a bit of Japanese, because I lived in Japan for 2 years as well. But my career was actually, I embarked on a career in corporate communications. And in so doing, I could use language, but I was using it for other people, to help other people to step up and to make presentations and keynotes. And I coached them to do a great job, but I always was hiding in the background, because for me, if you'd asked me to step on stage and address an audience, I'd have run right in the opposite direction. And I discovered that when we moved to Barcelona. We were living in Paris when I was working in communication. Then we moved to Barcelona. And once my kids were at school, I was thinking, something needs to happen and something needs to shift here. And I came across a clown workshop led by a wonderful, wonderful woman called Dominique. And the clown workshop turned out to be a complete catalyst, because I did suffer terribly from stage fright, but I knew I had things to say. And it was putting that red nose on that was it liberated me into realizing that once I connected to that inner child and the sense of play, which was very strong. I remember I loved play when I was little. That brought me out of myself. And it also, there are two things I think that it did. One was it helped me to let go, and the other was to trust. So let go of the way I thought things should be done, or my expectations, and trust in myself and my inner resources, but also trust in the people around me. In this case, it was my clown mates, that we could build something together. I could count on myself and I could count on them. And we did create some beautiful clownesque moments together. So that was really the pivotal moment. And from there, I experimented with theatre and improv, and then I set up my own business. So coaching executives and leaders on one level, it's to make better presentations and feel better about making them. But on a deeper level, it's much more about connecting to their essence, finding their voice so that they can connect with their audience. So it's about, what I work on is helping people bring their whole selves to their communications, so that now and again we can let that professional mask slip and be who we really are, And it's great. Not only does it not matter, but it's vital, because otherwise we go through this, keeping the mask on and hiding behind a professional identity, and we lose sight of who we are. So it's that person-to-person connection that I work on in the public speaking realm.
Wow.
Marvelous.
Well, this is just lovely.
Marvelous. So Spanish would be a fifth language, Caroline, would it?
Oh goodness, yes, actually, 3, 4, yes, it's true. Disney languages are my thing.
There you go. Wonderful, wonderful, and a perfect segue into Sue, I would have thought.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just loving the way that the threads of our stories actually are creating something of an essence of the four of us being here together, because actually it's really interesting, isn't it, that we are not islands. We may be unique, but we are not islands.
That's the great paradox, isn't it?
It is, absolutely, really interestingly. And interestingly, today is the is the anniversary of the death of John Donne, the British poet from the 17th century who wrote No Man is an Island.
Yeah, right, yes.
Which is really interesting. Anyway, hi, I'm Sue Heatherington, and as Caroline alluded to, I'm also in Southwest Wales, coming from a beautiful little valley. And I find echoes in this conversation. So in your sense of the unique personal identity, personal essence, but also the sense too that disruption, at times things need to happen in order to allow out what is on the inside. And I guess my take on this particularly brings those two things together. So like you, Ian, I have a very strong sense that we have a unique essence. And it is, as Parker Palmer talks about, our birthright gift.
Yes.
Which I think is a beautiful phrase, isn't it? It's the thing that we are that nobody else can take from us. But along the way, it gets shaped by life circumstances, the choices we make and the choices that are made around us. And I think that's important to say, because otherwise we end up in a, oh, well, why am I not, beating ourselves up, when actually we need to look at the masks and the overcoats that sometimes we wear. And we do that, we put those things on to survive, and therefore at times they help us, but in the end they actually cloud out the real us. There's a lovely poem by May Sarton, Now I Become Myself. And there's a beautiful phrase in it which says, now I become myself. It's taken time, many years and places. I've been dissolved and shaken, worn other people's faces. And I know for me that represents recognizing that kind of layers and layers and layers that may bury some of the essence of who we are. And sometimes it actually takes something that shakes us upside down in order to open that up and let that out. So for me, one of my most significant times was back 4 years ago, this time 4 years ago, actually, when at the end of a number of really rubbish years, rubbish in business, really challenging personal circumstances, trauma, serious illness, death, we finally thought we were going to be able to step forward. Hey, we've got through all of this. Yeah. And then I got diagnosed with breast cancer, completely unexpected, but actually, it was my necessary stop, because I'd been carrying things and just coping and just doing, and taking care of everyone else for so many years in so many different ways, including some really quite senior jobs that weren't easy going. But it gave me the stop to rethink who I was and where I was going. And it resulted in a really simple phrase. Hello, I'm Sue Heatherington and I'm a quiet disruptor. Because actually that summed up who I was. And it was a really nice, easy way just to say hello, rather than to give, the whole backstory of what had happened over the last numbers of years.
And of course, you wrote a wonderful book with that title.
Well, absolutely. So what was just meant as a placeholder actually has had expression in a whole number of ways. So firstly, and this what really struck me, was that as a placeholder, as a simple juxtaposition of two words you don't normally put together, there were a whole number of other people who said, oh, does that mean I can be a change maker in my business, in my work, in whatever, without having to be loud and put on the Superman cloak or stand on a, whatever. So what it did was, it wasn't just my identity, but it actually started to enable other people to discover their identity. And as Ian said, there was the book, Quiet Disruptors, Creating Change Without Shouting, a blog, a manifesto. And along the way, so many people have come back and said, through your writing, I feel seen and heard. And it's really interesting, isn't it? Because there are times when we need to hold that mirror up to ourselves and take a really hard look. And there are other times when we hold mirrors up for other people so that they can see themselves, not identikit. They're not the same as me, but there's something of my essence that they are sharing and that they are seeing and they are feeling. And for me, it opened up a part of me, actually been there all the time, but had been just so buried. And that was that I was a writer and a poet and a creative. And all sorts of stuff in my background, it said, that's not who I am. So
it's very zeitgeist, though, I think, Sue, because I have a sense that what is happening in the world today is there's a stirring of the silent majority.
Oh, I absolutely agree.
And you have helped that. I've just finished a couple of days ago, a wonderful book called Citizens by John Alexander, where he talks about how we're moving from the consumer story to the citizen story.
Yeah.
I put it straight away on my top 21 recommended books to read because of the idea.
Yeah.
And I sense that there is the silent majority, but they're not going to be silent anymore. But they're not going to do it in a loud way. It's going to be, as you say, without shouting. Another wonderful phrase of yours. And I think it's about, we're in a time, and I'm so glad to be alive in this time, we're in a time where more people are going to find their essence or their voice or their song than ever before.
Yes.
And it's just I get goosebumps every time I say that and every time I think about it. And it reminds me, going back, something you said, Sue, sort of kind of triggered this, because my mum used to say when I was a boy, he could talk underwater with a mouthful of marbles. And so I was kind of a natural. My grandparents, were public, and my father were public speakers, and it was inevitable, I guess, I would become one. And then I became a professional speaker, which turned into a 30-year journey. And I still do a little bit of it. But I remember about 4 or 5 years in, and I was quite successful as a professional speaker. And I thought, I've got this nailed. And I went to see a guy in Australia. He's he's known literally as a legend. He's the legendary speaking coach called David Griggs. He's still alive today, and we're still good mates. But I went to him very early on, 27 years ago, and when you went to see him for coaching, you had to appear in the old Adelaide courthouse, which was a very old style courthouse, a bit like the Old Bailey. And where you actually presented was right near the dock, and it was in the, near the go. It was an intimidating place for starters. And David says to me, give me 5 minutes of your best stuff. And I proceeded, and I think after about 60 seconds, he put his hand up and he said, stop right there. I can see a bit of Zig Ziglar, I can see a bit of Jim Rohn, I can see a bit of somebody else, but I'm not seeing much Ian Berry. And it was like, oh, I thought I was pretty good at this.
Yeah.
But what happened, and David had a course, and the course was called Beyond Words. And what you had to do as part of the course, you had to come out into an auditorium, and you had to come out and center stage. You weren't allowed to speak, you just had to be. And I couldn't do it. Nor could a lot of other folk in the class. But it was the first time I really understood that in order to be the best I could be, I had to be myself. And it changed everything for audiences. And I wasn't bad before then, but when I learned to be myself with an audience, it changed everything. And that was another sort of, I'd say, a defining moment in my understanding of, well, who is this person I look at in the mirror every morning? I know I'm not like everyone else. I know that. I know I've got unique things about me. Paradoxically, I know I need everyone else to help me. I can't do this alone. There's a wonderful song line. Forget the songwriter, but he said, no one of us has got us all together, but all of us together got it all. And it's this kind of thing. And I think we've all, as you guys have been referring to, we've all had these defining moments along the way, often really tough, hard, disruptive things that made us see ourselves in a different way again. And so I think it was you, Joanna, used the wonderful word integration.
Yeah.
We then get an opportunity to integrate that new learning with what's already a part of us, what's already part of our essence. And as we build on that, we become more magnificent. And then we get scared again because we don't want to be magnificent. We'd rather be miserable or mediocre. And we go through this ongoing sort of tipsy-turvy up and down journey until I think we kind of settle in a place where I can say without arrogance, I'm actually happy being magnificent. Doesn't mean I'm perfect. You talk to my wife for 49 years and she'll quickly tell you I'm not perfect. So it's not about perfection.
No.
But it is about this ongoing journey of being a human being fully alive.
Yeah. Yeah.
Magnificent.
Yeah. Yeah. And the sense I have in that is that we probably all have a number of different words that would bring that word magnificence to life. Yes. So
you guys have used significance, which was, I know, a great speaker, Nido Rain. He talks about the journey from success to significance, which is a wonderful insight as well.
I think I'd also use the word thriving, flourishing. You know, that sense of this isn't just static. This isn't static. This is something that grows and blossoms and buds, and
we're a work in progress.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I can feel it. I mean, it's when you said, Ian, about your experience with the public speaking professional, it's making the shift from performance to presence. And I think when we're performing, that's when we have that veneer that protects us. It acts as a shield. And I'm very aware of it. I mean, my journey involved a lot of performance of, fulfilling a role before I felt comfortable with being myself, standing there as me and not thinking that I had to put on a show of some kind. And also, I think realizing, listening to you, Joanna, that one of the pivotal moment wasn't just putting on the red nose, it was deciding to do that because my role as a mum had changed because my children had both gone to school. So it's and it also I experienced that as a hardship as well. It was like, oh, so, it's such a milestone on the path, on our paths as mothers. So it's interesting listening to all these different experiences, and as you said, there are so many overlaps and intertwining of experience that all come down to this idea of voice and essence and music. It's
yeah, and your wonderful phrase, I wrote it down, from performance to presence.
Yeah.
That was the thing, David. I then spent many years being coached by David, as a number of others did, and I used to go, and then after a while I'd go back to him for a tune-up, sort of once a year sort of thing, and we often talked about when you're yourself in front of a crowd and you're comfortable in your own skin, there is a presence that woos other people because they want that energy. I remember one time, one of the largest audiences I spoke to, about 4,000 people in Singapore one time, including the Prime Minister of Singapore and the Singaporean cabinet were in the front row. It was a bit intimidating. I wasn't quite physically well. I'd flown from London. I was a bit jet lagged, and if anything could go wrong, it could. But I remember David's advice to me: you're on before you're on.
Yeah.
And you have to just gather yourself, and you have to center yourself, and you've got to be yourself, regardless of how you might be feeling externally. You've got to find that internal place of strength, which is what happened that day. And when I went out in front of the crowd and I told a little story, and 4,000 people leaned in. I've had the opposite experience where a crowd can turn on you as well, but this is when everyone's essence is flying. Everyone wants the same thing, and it's a magical place. And as I say, I really sense the silent majority is stirred, and we are in a magnificent place in the world as more people find their voice. Particularly, and it's one of the reasons I wanted to have you guys in this conversation, particularly women finding their voice, because it's a long time since you had one. If you look at history,
can I say something there? I think for me, the one of the really significant characteristics of my journey of disruption was the motherhood aspect, and also the it sounds kind of cheesy, but let's just summarize it as stepping into feminine power, and that was a much more truthful way to live for me, and because I think I had been behind some masks, and those are societal masks, and how sort of norms that we have, and particularly in the workplace, when I returned to my work with a young son, I was a different person. I was the strength that I brought came from a different place, and it took time with that integration, that weaving together, for that to build until I felt like I really had voice in that, and that I could not just connect with that essence, but speak from that essence, and hold the mirror up for others as well, like we were describing before. But I think there is a real need. This is regardless of gender, but there is a real need for people to be themselves, and I think we can't connect to our essence. We can't be ourselves unless we can be as fully present as we are capable of in the current moment where we are. And right here, right now, this is the four of us. But I'm not a public speaker, but as a coach, as a mother, as a wife, as a friend, as a daughter, I show up as my best self when I can bring my full presence into those places. And I think there's just a real challenge. I think there's a practice we need to develop about how do we do that? How do we continue to bring ourselves into that moment connection with ourselves and also connection with others. What are our daily practices? Maybe that's creative, maybe that's meditation, maybe that's time in nature, maybe that's being with our significant people or doing the work that holds significance for us. But we need to nourish these things, these domains in our life that are meaningful. To the word that came to me before when you were talking, Sue, is to create vitality within us. And that vitality is sort of that spark that feeds our essence and allows it to kind of inhabit us. We inhabit ourselves, and it flows out into others, and it is contagious. And people go, "Oh, what's going on there? This is something fun. This is something interesting. I want to know. I want to be part of that change, or I want to be that that quiet disruptor."
I think there is a practice, and I think that's individual. I think there are more principles that we need to apply in our own best way. I used to be a guy in my early days mentoring. I used to sort of teach people what to do, but then I realized that isn't the right thing to do. I've got to help them find their own path. And so I was fortunate early on that I learned that there are principles around everything, and they're unchanging principles. The thing is, how do we help people to apply these principles in their own way? Because I quickly learned my way won't work for you, but the principle works. It's how do we apply the principles? Just a simple example. I mean, I used to talk all the time, moving on stage, talk all the time, and David said, "Why don't you pause?" And you can see how it matters, can't you? I'm now. Some people call me the great pauser. Because I learned how to do it. David said, never speak when you're moving on stage, which was a profound lesson. And so that's a principle of presenting, is the pause. The question is, how do you use it in your own way? And it's like, in terms of, I say we need to see, unearth, magnify, and enhance our essence. And there are principles that are involved. We won't go into them today, but there are principles that are involved. And then it's how do we help people then to apply the principles, but in their own way. And then the great paradox we referred to earlier, how do we allow them while they're doing that to let other people be involved? Because we can't do it alone. I think we're done with hero leadership. It's now everyone's a leader. How do you lead in your own way? And of course, you got to lead yourself first, of course.
In that sense, you talked earlier about there being a shift. You're seeing a sort of shift that's going on. One of the dimensions of that shift that I see going on is this recognition that we are not islands, that we are not just individuals, and it's not just me somehow talking to, giving, whatever, but I am formed by those I am around, and therefore one of the practices that I've seen as being really important, and again it's a paradox, which is to find more of who we are and our essence, we actually need to be connected with more other people.
Absolutely. Well, of course, it's the great teaching, isn't it? Of all the spiritual the great teaching is oneness.
Yes.
What we've learned is separateness.
Absolutely.
And I think we're now relearning oneness.
Absolutely.
And that's this equation. Yes, I'm me, little old one of a kind me, but I'm also you.
Yeah.
And you are me, and we're all one.
Yeah.
And when we get our own understanding of that, something profound happens, because I stop seeing other.
Yes.
Because that's the trouble in the world. We see other.
Yeah.
We see Russians and not humans, for example.
Yeah.
And I'm I'm excited by the fact that this otherness, this seeing other and being separate and all that, that's disappearing at a rate of knots.
Yeah. Yeah. And therefore, I think at times we have some choices to make. Certainly for me, I needed to come to the place of realizing I was very isolated. And that as much as I might think and practice and develop the things I wanted to say, actually, I could not do that in isolation. So I think for me, there are kind of three things that really help us become the change we want to see. One is that we need to find our tribe. We need to find our friends, because we need to have, and I can say this because I'm a farmer, actually we need the right environment to do this.
Yeah.
So we need to go search out the people who we can learn and grow with,
Yes.
and who we can be safe with in order to explore, the layers of stuff. Because if always we are in presentation mode or we are in doing mode, we'll never get to those layers deep down that actually express the essence of who we are, our magnificent. Secondly, I think we do need to do some work on finding what our voice is and what is it that we are needing to be saying. And that takes some quite conscious work. But thirdly, and I think, again, this has come up in this conversation, we need to find our space. And what I mean by that is that, that we need to find the place where the fullness of who we are has space to breathe, and therefore has space to grow. Now, for you, Ian, really clearly, one of those places for you is on a stage. But that's not the same for everyone.
No, it's a different stage today as well.
Yes.
It's more small groups now. I've been running peer groups since 1985, but they've become the thing, particularly with online, where, so I don't work with any more people that I can see on a screen.
Yeah.
Once the screen is full, 16 people is about the number. That's it.
Yeah.
I still do some of the others sometimes, but it's a different space.
Yeah.
But I've learned, I guess, and I might sort of perhaps add to your three by adding a fourth. It's about holding space in a unique kind of way. It's a way that we express ourselves. And I've been focusing on this now for a decade, and I've worked out how I hold space for the right people for me. Because like all of us, we're not for everyone. Your tribe may not be my tribe. And so it's really working out, and the online environment is very different. So it's different nuance to a live audience. I still love, I get goosebumps every time I do a live audience, but that's never going to change. But it's a different goosebump in a Zoom room or whatever. And so I'd add, yes, there's a space, but it's how do we hold that space? And within that holding, how do we give people the room to work it through, to think out loud, live out loud, experiment, etc. But Caroline, Joanna, what are you sensing might be some of your takeaways from your journey in defining your own essence? I think Sue's given us a great start with those three. What are some of yours?
Well, I'll jump in. One of mine, or you mentioned it, Ian, is this idea of pause and giving ourselves breathing space and head space so that we can then do that shine the light for other people.
Yeah.
I feel as well in the work that I do with clients that idea of space is very important, because it's such a different space from the one they usually move in. And somehow it unlocks unlocks something that they haven't perhaps experimented with or felt for a while, which could be a sense of play, for example, or connecting with their stories. And I was working with a client recently, and she had such amazing stories, and we realized that, because I love working with metaphor too, and the metaphors were flying thick and fast, and we realized that we're held up actually by pillars, which are our stories, and nothing and nobody can take those pillars away from us, because it's who we are. They'll always be there, so we'll always be held. And it's in doing that work that I realized that it's allowing ourselves. But I mean, I'm on the same journey. It's an ongoing quest. So my takeaway as well, it's an ongoing journey. And the more I offer that space to people, the more magical and colorful and creative that journey is.
Wonderful.
Beautiful.
Wonderful. And story, of course, would be another one that I'd sort of mix in, you know, put in there. I'm a storyteller first and foremost, I think, a conversationalist second. But I know when I tell a story, and my format in my We Need to Talk programs, I tell a story and the audience then shares what they heard themselves say to themselves in the story. And then we have a conversation, and then they tell their stories. And then we do group work and then individual work. So it's kind of a bit of a format, I guess, but it's the story, because when I hear a story that I can feel myself in, when you hear a story you can feel yourself in, there's something incredibly empowering about that. So I'm adding, so I'm looking, we've got a tribe, we've got to work to find our voice, we've got space, we've got holding space in a unique way, we've got the special pausing, relaxing in life, we've got the stories. Joanna, you've no doubt got a couple to add to those.
Well, it's such a rich, spacious topic that we could be here all night, I think, and still be adding more facets to it. But I think the kind of the essence of essence for me is summed up by a quote by Parker Palmer again, and he said, people grow in their own way, in their own time, in their own ways towards what they see as the light. And I think to find our essence and to deepen into our understanding and our living of that essence, we need to look for the inspiration in our life and look for the light in our life, look for what nourishes us and brings us alive. And there's a beautiful phrase that came from a idea around poetic activism, and it was talking about activism that arises from the contours of our own lives. And so I think this, combining those two things, the inspiration or the light that is in the contours of our own life, is a really kind of defining way, I think, to be able to help us understand and live in our essence. Wonderful.
And that would probably lead me to add in what has been a really powerful one for me. I studied theology, and that led me to mythology and the work of Joseph Campbell in particular. And I read a wonderful book called Hero of a Thousand Faces, which was written in 1949, if I recall correctly. And he wrote about 10 books on mythology as well, which I read them. I read them all. And then Carol and I, back in 1987, I think it was, we watched The Power of Myth, where he's interviewed by Bill Moyes. But Campbell, of course, is famous for the phrase, follow your bliss, which is another word for essence, bliss. And I researched, what does it actually mean, this bliss thing? I'd listened to Joseph, I'd read all these books, and then one time they did a documentary on Joseph's life, and the president of the Joseph Campbell Foundation in the documentary says, bliss is doing what you can't not do. And so I've had wonderful opportunity to work with a lot of folk over the last few years to help them to work out what is it that you can't not do. It's like, I can't not be on a stage of some kind. Okay, it's a part of me. But when we work out what it is, what we can't not do, and then we dedicate our lives to doing it, we end up in this wonderful place. Stephen Farber, he wrote a wonderful book called The Radical Leap, but he also wrote another great book just recently. It came out called Love is Damn Good Business. But Stephen says, you got to do what you love in the service of people who love what you do. And what I found is that when we work out what it is that we can't not do, so it's almost like breathing. We have to do whatever this is. When we find out what it is, and we do that, we find people who, we're doing what we love in the service of people who love what we do. And that's a magical place to be. Any others, ladies, that you might add to our little list, I guess, of things that we might do to see, unearth, magnify, and enhance our essence?
I don't know that we can trump what you've just given us, Ian.
Well, I didn't
that sense of, because actually this morning for Caroline and I, it's morning, we just had a beautiful expression of that, four-way expression of that. The nature of our contributions to this conversation have all been what we can't not do, and we've drawn out very different facets, and it's been wonderful seeing it at work. It's lovely.
It
So
has.
thank you for the opportunity, for being able to see some weaving in action.
I'm grateful to you, wise women, for joining me, and we'll look forward to doing this again sometime.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.